I want to get a sense of what the ratio is with all these different ingredients. So you have like max hangs and then repeaters. Are you also mixing in outdoor climbing with all those things?
It really does change. If the weather's particularly good and I can get out a bit more, then I might get to climb outside, say 3 times a week, in which case, whatever day that is, I'll just go out and just forget about training for that day, because that's always a priority for me, is getting out on dry rock. And we don't get a lot of it in the UK over the winter.
Would you still do your hangboard warm up for those days?
Yeah, I normally will. I'll normally do a warm up, and depending on what I'm coming outside, if I only climb outside for a bit on a project, then I might well come back and train, because I just feel like I've not done enough. But often I might climb until the point where my skin's really thin, and then I'll stop. But yeah, I will always do a kind of a good hangboard warm up with some max hangs in normally before I go out. So the ratios of what I do, it does change. If I can get outside a bit more, maybe 3 sessions a week, then I'll probably do 1 less climbing session on the board and maybe 1 less dead hanging session. But in a normal kind of a bog standard week, I might get out once at the weekend and then 1 afternoon in the week. So then I do 2 board sessions and 3 fingerboard sessions as well.
Are those all on different days? Do you ever combine the hangboarding with the board sessions?
Yeah, I do sometimes do a double day.
Okay. Are they back to back, or would you separate them out by like some hours in between?
Oh yeah, no, it totally depends. Ideally, I would have ideally I'd have about 5 hours, like a really good rest in the middle, but it completely depends. You know, if I've got something I need to do that day that has to happen at a certain time, then I just fit training around it.
Okay.
I deal with the rest of life better if I know I've done some training and I've kind of ticked that box. I feel like everything else is a little easier for me. So it's really important for me to do the training. Yeah. It's really important for me to do that, and I'm not too worried about optimizing it. I'd rather have done it than not do it, because it's not optimal, you know, for me. If there's no time, I'll quite often do a hangboard session, climb on the board immediately after for a bit less time, and then be done, which could be 3 hours, but then I've got the rest of the day.
So that's great. I wanted to clarify. So when you say you kind of hit your fingers 5 times in a week, some of those might be hangboard sessions, some of those might be on the climbing board.
And my structure is pretty relaxed. I like to have a number of sessions that I'll fit into a week, but I don't really worry what order they're in, and I don't particularly worry if some of them don't go as well as I'd hope, because I think as long as on average you're seeing an improvement. So if you look back in 6 months' time, you'll see that you've improved at something, even if day to day your sessions are all over the place. I think you need to zoom out and look at the kind of macro scale of it, rather than getting too hung up on each individual session, because you can always have an amazing fingerboard session or just a terrible one completely out of the blue, can't you? And you don't really know why, but they just happen. But the important thing is to really not worry about that. It's the fact that you've ticked off a session and you've done it, and in 6 months' time, you probably will have improved when you look back at the results. So for instance, I'll always do an open-handed session, I'll always do a full crimp session, a half crimp session, and then a couple of different climbing sessions on the boards as well, which are aimed at different things. So we'll always do those within the 7-day period. But some of those will be really short. So if I'm not feeling great, I'll just do a few hangs. Or if I'm feeling good, I might do 5 hangs on 2 different grip types, for instance. And then in my climbing sessions, I might just do 10 boulder problems on the board. Or if I'm feeling a bit better, I might do 20 boulder problems on the board. So I really like every session's really, it does vary. But as long as I feel like at the end of the week, I've kind of covered all the bases I want to cover and tried really hard in a couple of sessions, then I'm pretty happy with that.
Any thoughts on focusing on one area for a given amount of time before switching, or are you mixing in repeaters and max hangs and different sorts of protocols within that 5-day cycle and just mixing them in all the time?
Yeah, well, I always mix everything in a week, but if I look in the long run, I'll tend to do at least 10 sessions of any one thing once a week for 10 weeks normally. So for instance, I'll be doing a max hanging session, and I'll make sure I'll do that 10 times, and then I'll do a repeater session, and it might not be running at the same time as that, but I'll do 10 of those as well. So for me, if I do 10 sessions of something and I'm still seeing slight improvements, then I'll keep going. But if not, then I've done these 10 sessions and then I'm just sort of, maybe I'll move on to something else. But they kind of run simultaneously, but just on different days for me. And I just keep track of what sessions, sort of how many of that particular session I've done over the past few weeks, and just see where we're at with it. But yeah, it's just a sort of, I just think, well, I want to do 10 sessions of this and see how they go. Maybe that'll be enough. Maybe I can keep going. And then on another day, I'll be on session, say 7 out of 10 on another thing.
That's really interesting. So if I'm getting this right, so you might have, I'm just going to make up an example. You might be working on like, I'm going to do full crimp max hangs with weight added to my body, 2 hands on one of the days. And I might be doing half crimp, 1 arm assisted, whatever, max hangs on another day. I might be doing repeaters on an open hand grip another day. I might be climbing on the board a 4th day. And you're just going to do any of those sessions until you stop seeing progress with that very specific thing. And they're kind of like going on simultaneously and overlapping, you know, just kind of, am I getting that right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's really interesting. That's a really different approach actually than I've ever come across before, but it sounds fun. It kind of makes me curious.
It feels like it's kind of the least prescriptive way of doing it, but I think then at least you are covering all the bases in a kind of training week or whatever block you decide your block's going to be. For me, it's a week because it makes sense. It's easy, isn't it? Works around everything. But yeah, I find that way you're always doing different stuff, but also you know that you're doing a good number of sessions of each thing that you're doing. It's not totally randomly jumping around between different things. Every day you're not pulling on differently on a different hold. So there is sort of structure to it, but day in, day out, it doesn't really feel like it because you can do any of them, whatever you feel like you can do. Some days you might have a split in the finger. So say like hanging on a certain pocket just isn't going to work because you have a split. So then you have to change what you're doing. So to have that flexibility is so useful, I think. But then there's sorts of hidden structure in the background. But session on session, it's kind of a little bit more fun, I think, maybe.
Do you benchmark your finger strength? Have you seen better results with that kind of method to the madness approach versus a more simple, one grip approach?
I mean, I think that I'm not trying to poo-poo that more simple approach, because I think for a lot of people, that is amazing, because if it's just one thing to think about, one thing to concentrate on, it's so useful. For a lot of people, that is the way to do it, isn't it? Because if the option is don't do any handboarding or just do this one particular half crimp dead hang session, then all of a sudden they can fit that into their life and it works and they will improve. So I think I'm not trying to kind of say that's not a good way of training, because I think for so many people doing that would be brilliant. But for me, I feel like it's just it isn't quite enough. Because for me, there's so much I feel like I need to be working on all the time. Maybe that's my weird kind of rounded approach to climbing. I just feel like there's too much to be working on to concentrate solely on one thing. But yeah, I mean, I probably do quite a bit of training compared to a lot of people, but I think because I've been doing it for a while, I kind of, my body's fairly used to it, and it doesn't really feel like it's that hard now. It doesn't affect my outdoor climbing so much now. I feel like maybe I'm used to it, or maybe I'm just used to being a bit tired, whatever.